Wyndham. Oops. So this was a surprise for me. I really, really loved this book. Again, we did this as part of a book club, and a lot of people didn't like it, but for some reason, well, I always love disaster movies. It's a genre that, for some reason, appeals to me. And this is basically that, but it's just from 6-7 decades ago. And I liked that. I liked that it felt timeless at the same time. Anyway, I gave it 90 out of 100, and I said, our book club offering for March, and I love a good disaster movie, so this was right up my street. I feel like even Boyle's 28 Days Later shares quite a bit of Triffids DNA, which is understandable, as The Day of the Triffids is a very competent apocalyptic thriller. First of all, I did not realise that this was about plants. If you're expecting an action-packed killer plants go to war with the human race, you'll potentially feel let down, but it's better than that in my opinion. The Triffids are basically background characters that help move the story along as and when required, but crucially are also creepy as I watched the hokey 2009 BBC adaptation after reading this, and it quickly became obvious that this is much better realised in book form. In some ways, Wyndham's original felt more modern, or at least more timeless, than the BBC version. For the 1950s, this might be no big surprise, but there's a definite sexist overtone throughout, even though I think Wyndham would have considered himself a feminist for the time. The sexually liberated leading lady is happy to become part of a harem to repopulate the earth, but there's no shortage of women to men, so why? Only the women had to be exclusive, it seems. There's also a furious speech halfway through about how women can do whatever they want. Great, but that they're just too lazy to do so. Oh. The religious zealots at odds with the men of science is a common trope in genre stories, but it felt more authentic here given the era. And you'd think that in that era, that would have been, you know, the general public, I would have thought, would have been more on the faith side. Obviously we've got both now, but I would have thought it was more risky to release a book where your heroes are all men of science. I'm definitely going to give more of Wyndham's books a go. I'm just hoping this isn't the only genre offering, as he's clearly very good at it. So that was number 5, and then number 4 was another one I read on the Kindle. I went through a bit of a period wanting to read just like old war books, and this was the second one, I think. Where the hell are you? Here we go. And this one, like I said in the other part of the video, this one is about 80 years old, I think. All Quiet on the Western Front. All Quiet on the Western Front. I was pleasantly surprised by this, by how much I loved it. It's by Eric Maria Remarque, don't know if I've pronounced that terribly well, but that was my attempt. So, just to remind, the reason I'm reading my reviews from Goodreads is because I wouldn't really remember much about them otherwise, and that's no testament to the books, that's just my memory. So I gave this 90 out of 100, and I said I wanted to read another World War I book after being completely blindsided by another book that's in the top 10, and what better way than to see how things were on the other side, the German side. Unless I'm mistaken, All Quiet keeps things quite vague in terms of which battles are featured, but you can easily assume that they would have been at the Somme, etc. Like the counterparts from the book that's at number 1 of this top 5. Considering this was written in the 1920s, I've just had a drink because my mouth was getting a bit dry. I think you'll have probably heard the dryness. So considering this was written in the 1920s, this is absolutely incredible at demonstrating the mental toils of war. People get their arms blown off and die in various horrible ways, of course, but physical injury is less of a focus than Paul and his comrades' mental health, which I can only imagine wasn't a common trope in 1929, and I would have thought probably somewhat taboo to talk about, like, men's mental health especially, and women were probably locked up if they did. Brotherhood and friendship is one of the main themes of the book, and Paul's brother-like bond with the older cat is one of its strong points. Again, you'd be forgiven for thinking this was written 100 years later. Oh yeah, it's actually nearly 100 years old, bloody hell. The book doesn't glorify the war. The soldiers aren't made out to be heroes. They're just trying to survive one moment from the next. While you can see why Nazi Germany hated the book, it's very neutral in terms of the Allies versus the Central Powers. It's fair to say it's anti-war, pro-soldiers. One of the most upsetting parts of the book is where Paul brutally stabs a French soldier, but then tries to nurse him, comfort him in his last hours. Apologies, I should have given a spoiler warning there. Again, a slight spoiler. Once he discovers that the guy that he's just killed has a wife and daughter, or stabbed, Paul naively vows to find a way to help them. Very excited to watch the recent movie on Netflix, and I still haven't watched that. It's a movie that one of my best mates we've said that we're going to watch when he comes around, but there's like a massive list of these movies that we're going to watch when he comes that we just never do, so I'm just going to end up watching it myself. The next one is another Audible one. We're back to Audible. And when I said in part 1 that the Mini Driver autobiography, I only bought it because it was like on a deal with another book. It was this one, and it was A Heart That Works by Rob Delaney. A Heart That Works. So it's, I suppose, trigger warning because it's about the passing of his son. It's obviously a very sad book, and it's written by a comedian, so let me just find my review. Here we go. So I gave it 90 out of 100. I'm a big fan of Rob Delaney since Buffy during its second season. His general manner I describe as humble deadpan, tickles my funny bone immensely, but in this book I'd be chuckling out loud and then trying not to bawl my eyes out in the space of one sentence. This is a book about grief, specifically about Rob and his family grieving for their little boy, Henry. Henry was killed by a brain tumour before he'd celebrated 3 birthdays. And I say killed by, not lost his battle with, thanks to one of many points Rob makes during the book that gives you a different perspective on something so tragic. Maybe you can't love a book about grief, but Rob does a great job at shining a humorous light on possibly the worst type of grief that a person could live through. This is a book I would highly recommend, specifically on audiobook. Rob's narration lends to the humour as well as the emotion. Early on in the book, when he's admiring something about Henry, his voice breaks slightly before it sounds like carrying on in a separate recording. It was almost too intimate, like I was invading Rob's privacy, but he does clearly enjoy talking about his boy, and hopefully writing and narrating this book helped ease even a fraction of his pain. So yeah, like I said, apologies if that got too deep all of a sudden. So number 2 is another Audible book. So I say I've read books, but I've just listened to them clearly. And that one is another old book. I read this years ago. In fact, no, it is Audible. I read this years ago, but really enjoyed it again. The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini. I think Khaled Hosseini, yeah. There's a movie about this. I did watch this one though, yeah. I did watch this movie this year. So bear with me while I find the review. So, hard to review this one. I loved it, but it's very sad. I wrongly assumed it was a true story, so although I'm sure things like this did happen at the time in Afghanistan, it's actually much easier to enjoy if you do know that it isn't a true story. Your heartbreak hopefully won't be as brutal if you're aware Hassan etc. don't really exist. Still, it's testament to Khaled for writing something that's so believable and rich. I'll definitely be reading more of his books. Also looking forward to watching the movie. One final thought, I realised quickly that this is a book you'd be grateful to have on an e-reader, as there are so many Farsi, Dari terms that you want to look up, and often when I'm listening to an Audible, I'm walking the dog. So then, the number 1 book for me for 2025 in terms of books that I read this year is another war book. This is the one that set me off on like a bit of a war era. I had it and I accidentally clicked on the wrong one and now it's gone. Here we go. Okay, the book is called In Memoriam. In Memoriam by Alice idiosyncrasies. Win has ignited a fire in me to read more about Lewes, Ypres and the Somme, but also this era of Britain as a whole. There's no shortage of characters, but it's easy to care about them all, and even ones who should barely register. I'd never considered before just how excited the men of the lost generation were about joining the fight. Wynne paints a picture of a country full of eager, patriotic men. England is magic, as they keep saying, which descends into an almost completely broken one. The men struggling to reconcile their misplaced rage and survivor's guilt with being back in the land of hope and glory. I wonder how things would differ if the story shifted to World War II. You might scoff, like I did, in the pre-war chapters at how half the student body of the book's version of Eton are seemingly gay, but the numbers are possibly realistic. The lack of any bigotry was a nice change, but probably a lot less realistic for the time. I'd forgot about that, there's like absolutely no homophobia in I think, at least in the student parts of it. Dear Henry, I'm not playing either yours always